AWS's EC2 Europe Cloud using RightScale. I want to quickly introduce you to our panel today. We're very happy to be joined by Martin Burr, who's the European Business Director for Amazon Web Services. And then on the RightScale side, this is Josh Fraser, the Vice President of Business Development. I'm also joined here by Torsten von Eichen, our founder and CTO, as well as Ed Goldberg, our evangelist. As usual, we have Matt Small on the Q&A log, along with David Welch, one of our sales engineers. Today's agenda, we're going to quickly dive right into a demo showing you a single interface that has two different deployments across the world. So Ed's going to take us through that. We're then going to turn it over to Martin, who's going to introduce EC2 Europe and tell you some specifics about that. And then move back over to RightScale and show you how the RightScale management system is approaching this multi-cloud structure. Then we're going to turn it back over to Ed and Torsten, who are going to take you through building a deployment in multiple zones across the world from scratch. As always, feel free to ask questions at any point. Use the Q&A log, and as usual, the webinar and the live recording will be made available on our website about 24 hours after the completion of today's webinar. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ed to take us through the first demo.
Very good. But Josh, that's multiple regions. We'll have to get used to talking about regions now, Josh. So hand over the presenter to me, and I'll demonstrate a little bit about how to deploy servers in multiple regions. And what we've done, I'm still not seeing the deployment, guys. Please send the screen over to me.
Should be
there we go. There we go. Take monitor number 2 there. Okay. So what we're showing today is a very interesting deployment. For the first time, I'm going to be demonstrating servers in 2 different regions. This server is actually in the EU region, and this other server over here, US LAMP, is in the US region. And what we're demonstrating is how you can deploy a demonstration like this, where I have a website both in the EU and in the US, and I put a little cover page up here on the front, and through the magic of DNS, the first time you go to the website, you see this cover page, and you can either pick the US, and I'll change screens over to the US webinar demo blog. You can see the usual crowd up there in Santa Barbara enjoying the sun. Then I'll go back over here to our little map, and I'll pick the EU version. So now when I click on the mouse, I'm going to a different website. So this website's actually being served out of the EU. And you can see it's eu.rightscaledemo.com. So that's the quick demo. The idea here is I'm managing and deploying servers both in the United States and the EU from one dashboard. You're seeing it all on one screen for the first time, complete with monitoring of these plots both in the EU and the US on one screen. So remember, Josh, multiple regions, not multiple zones. I'd like to pass it over to Martin and let him give us a little more of an idea of how we make all of this work. So Martin, you have any ideas?
So Amazon data center infrastructure, which we'll talk about in greater detail in a bit, reflects a great deal of diversity. So we deploy multiple facilities spread across multiple geographies, and this slide sort of reflects a conceptual version of that. So each data center that we operate, and for the most part they're data centers that we own, is in a different floodplain, different power grid, and is serviced by multiple Tier 1 bandwidth providers. Now that's exposed in the EC2 API in the form of availability zones. What this means is that anything you put into S3 is replicated across multiple availability zones, which makes S3 extremely durable. And from an EC2 perspective, you're able to start virtual machines either in different zones or in different geographies where we offer EC2. Next slide. So currently we offer EC2 in 2 of our 3 data center clusters. We offer it in Europe, in the East Coast of the US, and it's coming soon to the West Coast of the US. And so part of what you're seeing in the RightScale demo is the fact that they've spun up within literally minutes web infrastructure in both the EU and in the US. So that enables you, for example, to have failover not only between zones, but between entire geographies, as well as being in compliance with local data privacy protections. This then ties in quite nicely to Amazon CloudFront, our global CDN. We currently operate 17 points of presence for CloudFront spread around the world, as represented by the orange dots, and we're in the process of rolling out more. Next slide. So in terms of what we're seeing in terms of adoption or utilization for our infrastructure in Europe is sort of use cases all along this continuum from, for example, Oracle offering backup and archiving of Oracle 11i into S3. IDG in Germany uses this to serve game demos, something that was extremely hard to provision for before. Now they just put a single copy into S3. Moving up that stack, we have customers like The Guardian in the UK who run short-term websites on EC2. For example, their website for the Oscars recently ran on EC2, and from a cost perspective, it cost them all of £2.61. Channel 4 currently hosts 2 websites on EC2, that for PhoneJacker and for Skins. Expansys, which is a global provider of smartphone and intelligent devices, they're moving their entire website infrastructure onto EC2 to accommodate the huge swings they see based on time of year. And then we have customers both in the private sector and in academia doing extremely large-scale batch processing, batch computation. The example on this slide is the Max Planck Institute in Germany. And the great thing about our infrastructure and the services we offer is that they're all pay for use, and you can start anywhere along this continuum that makes sense for your business and move up or down as needed.
Great, thanks, Martin. Appreciate the overview. Let's jump back and quickly introduce RightScale in the context of this multi-cloud scenario. Hopefully most of you are familiar with RightScale at this point, but RightScale is cloud management systems focused specifically at filling the gap between the low-level cloud resources and the applications that customers want to run. We focus on 3 core areas of value. The first is around automation, everything from configuration management to things you often hear in the press like auto-scaling. Second are cloud-ready solutions, specifically our server templates and write scripts that are prepackaged around common workloads that customers wish to deploy in the cloud. For example, setting up a MySQL cluster or adding Splunk to your deployment. Finally, we complement all of that with expertise and support, helping customers get up and running quickly in the cloud using best practices and then taking care of ongoing common lifecycle management tasks. RightScale is designed specifically to be multi-cloud with support for Amazon, FlexiScale, Rackspace, and GoGrid, among others. Specifically related to multi-cloud, Amazon's EC2 EU in many ways functions as a separate cloud, specifically a separate region, as Ed mentioned. RightScale's support for EC2 US and EC2 Europe is designed specifically to maintain simplicity and automation RightScale customers have grown accustomed to, while embracing many of the benefits of a multi-cloud platform. Specifically single management system and design architecture, so consistency across regions, taking advantage of various different performance considerations like latency, opportunities around creating business continuity, disaster recovery plans, and ways to adhere to various different internal policies or regulatory compliance issues. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Torsten, who's going to take us through some of the specifics on how EC2 US and EC2 Europe are different and how RightScale is approaching those differences.
Good. Let's get down to some nuts and bolts. So I think the most surprising and nice, very helpful decision that Amazon made when introducing the EC2 Europe region is to operate it really separately from the EC2 US region. So that's, in a way, the most surprising thing, which is that resources around EC2, at the bottom, instances, images, security groups, etc., are really disjoint between the US and the EU. The reason this is really good is that it provides failure isolation. It means that whatever happens in one region does not affect what happens in the other region. So they are really distinct and can act as complete separate failure zones. In case something happens, you really have a DR set up if you have a clone of your deployment in the other region. Of course, sort of on day one, as someone tries to take advantage of a second region, it is a little bit of a hurdle because you have to replicate everything. So instances or particular images or security groups you may have set up in the EU, and now you want to move over and add services in the US region, have to be copied over. So images need to be copied to the US before you can launch an instance in the US using that image. And so forth all the way down to EBS volumes, snapshots, IPs, etc. So it's a little bit of a hurdle to get going. However, in the long run, I'm convinced this is the right decision and this is the right setup, and really it will help things tremendously and will make everything more resilient. Just as a note, some of the other Amazon Web Services are slightly different in the way they expose the different regions, in particular S3. On S3, the simple storage service bucket the bucket namespace is global, but this particular bucket is bound to a region. So a bucket is either in the US East region or it is in the EU region. However, the namespace is global, so you can't a priori tell from the name of a bucket where it is located. Also, credentials, the login, the secret access key, all of those things are global. So the same set of credentials gives you access to the US and the EU regions. The first level of support in RightScale is to just directly support all of the features of the different regions in EC2 and AWS in general. And you'll see this more in the demo. Here's two screen captures. On the left-hand side, we expose the regional resources. So you see AWS Global, which has the resources that are managed globally or that have a global namespace, such as the S3 browser or CloudFront. And then below that are the resources for the US and the resources for the EU. On the right-hand side, we've also published our what we call write images. These are machine images that we craft very carefully, building a clean machine image from a clean install of the operating system with the minimum set of utilities that you need in order to get going on AWS, and it includes all of the things to make a server operate under RightScale. So we've replicated those to the EU, and I see here we're only showing the CentOS one. We now have support for Ubuntu as well, and those are available or will be available in the EU region by the end of today. So we've been replicating and really providing support for the EU region on par with the US region. The most important level is really one level up, which is that we're making it easy to manage deployments across regions so that you can really manage everything on one page, in one system. The guiding principle is that we are exposing the capabilities of the regions in cloud. So we're not trying to make this auto magic and hide the differences or hide the fact that there are regions from you, because we believe that expanding into multiple regions and operating in multiple regions requires some thought and some planning, and not sort of something fancy happening automatically. We thought initially of providing nice, cool, snazzy buttons like migrate my server, migrate my entire deployment to a different region, and of course that sounds cool. You press one button and bang, 10 servers show up in a different region of the world as clones of the ones you're already running in the first region, and that all sounds really cool and can be done, but the reality is that a real business doesn't just wake up at 6 a.m. for breakfast and say, oh, let me just move my servers to a different region, press a button, and off we go. That just makes no sense from a business point of view. It does require thought and some planning, so we provide the tools that allow you to plan, that allow you to easily clone and move things and copy and replicate across the different regions, but you retain full control, full transparency, and the ability to plan, because oftentimes what you want in another region is a slightly different deployment, slightly different variant of what you have. Perhaps smaller because there are fewer customers, they're lower load. So what we provide is multi-cloud deployments. You can have servers in multiple clouds, multiple regions within a single deployment. They share global settings and inputs. So when you specify the admin email or the domain name or the size of or where the app comes from, etc., the revision that should be checked out of version control, that's all global settings, and you can monitor across different clouds. Also the server templates, which is our concept of how we build up a server, is through a server template where you can specify all of the ingredients that go into the server before it launches, so that when it launches it comes out automatically, fully configured and in operation. And those can be replicated from one cloud to another, and we will soon have an easy way to have a single server template that can be launched in multiple clouds. So with that, I want to switch back to Ed, who's going to give us some demo of how all of this works in practice on the deployment that we saw earlier. Ed, are you ready?
Oh, I'm very ready. So what he was talking about when he was saying that they're slightly different in the different zones, let me go back to our RightScale demo where we're a company, we've decided we're going to have something different in each zone. So obviously, if I'm in the EU, I want imagery that makes sense in the EU, and when I'm in the US, I want imagery that makes sense in the US. So here's a really good example of that, just sort of a little bit of difference between the two deployments. They're basically the same servers, as you'll see in a moment, but they have that viva la difference in there, so each one is just slightly different, and it does demonstrate what you need. Another good example, if you want to see it, is going to the different Amazon servers for their catalog. They're actually regional. So what I want to do at this point is I want to really build this from scratch. You've seen the demonstration. You've seen the basic idea of a deployment in two regions inside RightScale, but this time I want to build the whole thing from scratch for you. So the idea here is to start with the basic ingredients and build the whole thing up, and as I go through the menus, you're going to learn a lot more about how RightScale does deployment management. So the first thing I need to do is go out and give myself some resources. I always like to start with the elastic IPs, because IP allocation is the thing that's going to provide the fundamental to the external user system, and I'm going to work in from the outside. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the AWS US zone inside the cloud menu. I'm going to select the elastic IP, and I'm going to add one new one. Now, anyone that's acquired an IP address in a foreign country will realize that being able to acquire an IP address with one click of the mouse is really quite revolutionary. Another nice thing we can do is we can give these things names. We call them nicknames. So I'm going to give it example, but maybe that's not as good a name as I like, because this is an example for the US. So let's just add US on there. Note that I can not only put in a name, I can also edit it dynamically and change my mind. This is a flexible system. So as the marketing group makes their changes and what's going on, I'm going to be able to update things and change my deployment later. So I've now allocated an IP address in Europe, in the United States. Let's do the same thing on the other side of the pond here. I'll go to AWS EU and ask for an elastic IP. Note they are a separate list. As he just said, these are distinct. Allocate an IP address with a new button.
So just while you click through the background, an elastic IP is a public IP address in the Amazon infrastructure that can be assigned to any server in the region and can be reassigned. So if you need to move an IP address from one server to another you can do so at runtime.
Exactly. And the reason I did this first is, as it says on the top of the screen here, this takes a while. It's going to take up to about 5 minutes for these things to sink in through their routers and everything that's going on. So what I try to tell people is IP addresses are like fine wine. You want to age them a little bit. It's even best to do this the day before or even 2 days before and let these IP addresses really sink in. So now that we have IP addresses both in the EU and the US, the next thing I have to do is go open the firewall. Create security groups. So I'm going to go back to the US, and we're going to flip-flop back and forth so you can see how easy it is to do this. And we have here security groups. This is just like the firewall that you'd use in any company. So I'm going to add a new zone to our firewall. In all cases, I'm going to use the name example. So if you're just following example, you'll see. And we'll just call the...
While you're typing, just as background, security groups are very similar to VLANs, virtual LANs, and all access rules. So servers can be placed within a security group. Servers within the same security group can directly communicate with one another. And the rules on the security group dictate which servers outside can open connections or send packets into the group.
And also on the inside, Thorsten, what I'm doing right now allows the servers to talk to each other within my account at AWS. So the first thing I'm going to add is the group, which is the group itself, which means when adding this command to this particular VLAN group, if you want to call it that, everybody within the group example is allowed to intercommunicate. They can talk to each other. The next thing I have to add, and be careful, change this to a 0. Remember, I want to make this an any group. That type of naming is a little unique. So remember, it's 0./0 for everybody. So the first thing I need is SSH access. Port 22 opens SSH access. By the way, this is required for RightScale. It's not optional. You can't change it to a different port, although you can have extra ports if you'd like. So I've now added TCPs, IPs, any port allows access to 22. Later we'll guard this with keys, so not everybody can get in. They'll have to have a key to get in. Same thing, every port 80. I'm going to add that to our group. So basically I've built a new VLAN or security group in the US that allows everybody to communicate amongst my servers. I can talk to it on port 22, and the world can use port 80 to get there. If you missed anything, we're going to do it once more. So that's security groups in the US. As you can see from the next screen, the demo I've been doing are all pretty much the same. I configure things pretty much the same from server to server. The only difference is if I have HTTPS, I'll have to open one more port. Let's do it quickly once more again. Security groups in the EU. Note, they're distinctly different. I have one in the US and one in the EU. So I'm going to add a new group in the EU.
Ed, while you click through, maybe I can a little bit of background here. I think around the security groups, that's really one of the remaining issues really that we see is that when you have servers in both regions that communicate with one another, currently there is no infrastructure in order to provide a private secure network between these servers in different regions. And that is something sort of on the Amazon side. Currently the security groups are bound to a region. Traffic between servers in different regions really traverses the internet. So if you're, for example, replicating a database across regions, then you need to put in place your own secure tunnel of some sort, either an SSL tunnel or SSH tunnel, or set up a VPN type of infrastructure across the servers.
And that's a good point. In my demonstration, my databases are distinct. They're not sharing those blog comments and everything. Each one is in a distinctly different zone, and they're not replicating across the zones, are they?
Right. And that's something we're working on, and we know of a couple of other solutions that are in progress today.
Okay, we're continuing to work in from the outside to the inside. We've built our IP addresses. We've allowed it to get through the firewall. Now we have to build keys. The keys are SSH keys based on the SSL library, and the idea is that these secure keys provide us secure access to our servers and keep the bad guy out. So I'm going to create a new key just as easily as clicking the new button and giving the key a name. There's a lot more that goes on here. But the nice part about RightScale is not only is it going to keep track of this key for me, but it's also going to keep track of its nickname so I won't lose it, not tell it to everybody else, and keep it in a protected key store so these don't rumble around on my laptop or get lost. Later on, I'll be able to access each server by its key, and for anybody who wants to write down all these numbers really quickly so they can type in the password, go right ahead. I'll delete the key after the demo. Now we're going to go to the EU, and I'm going to create exactly the same type of a key. Remember, the key store in Europe is distinct from the key store in the US. Having a password to the server in the EU does not give you a password to the server in the US. So once again, we've put a firewall between the two. I'm going to name the key the same name just to give you a clear statement. They are in separate namespaces. Unlike S3 and unlike the other parts, these two things are in separate namespaces. So I can have the name example for a key in Europe and the name example for a key in the US. They are distinct. Okay, I hope everybody's written down the password so they can log in later to our servers. I've stored them in the key store over here. And the key store not only remembers these keys and keeps them secure, but it also checks to make sure they're valid. This little yes over here, you got to check every once in a while. That means that it's not corrupted. It's a correct key. Now, if you actually want to load your own keys, somebody at RightScale can help you with creating keys yourself and loading them. You don't have to actually use a key that's created by us if you have key pairs you wish to use. The next thing we need to do, we've got our environment built. We have our zones and our keys, is we need to design server templates. Now, the good part is RightScale's done most of the work. We'll go to the Design menu, Server Templates, and we'll look in the templates provided by RightScale. What's really nice about this dashboard is this little filter up here. It's wonderful. So we don't have to look through everything. I know it's in the trial, so I'm just going to type trial, and it reduces the limits the list so I can just see the trial ones. And I'm interested in starting with this trial EU, which is exactly what was in the demonstration. Now, what I'm doing is I'm starting from a best practice RightScale template, so you don't have to write it yourself. It contains lots of goodness. There's lots of stuff in it, a lot of detail, and I'm going to start from that. The first step I need to do is clone that into my own environment. Why? I'm going to want to make changes. This isn't a lock-in. This isn't an idea where you can't change all these templates or how this works. You can make it exactly the way you want. So once again, I'm going to change its name. And in this particular one was the EU one. So this is the example EU template. So I now have, well, try it again. I think I missed the button. There we go. Okay. I now have a template in the United States, which is the correct template for the US. Probably the reason it's not accepting my name is I probably already have one of that name. Let me go find out what I did here. Yep, I have an example EU and example US already. Sorry guys, I was going to delete those before the presentation, but let me delete the US one. Now you can tell this is really live and I've done it once before. Okay, so what should have happened is I should have ended up with an example EU template after that last step. And at this point, once I've cloned the template from the outside, from the RightScale best practices, I have an example EU template. But I need a US one also. So that's what this button's for right here. Replicate to the US. There are some small changes that have to be made in the deployment, and this is going to make those changes for me. So when I replicate to the US, now that I've deleted the US one, it's going to work. I create a new template. Now this new template is named V1, which isn't very helpful in my case. We're going to change this into US. Once again, I can change the names after I'm done. And this time it'll work because I already deleted the other one. So now we have our components. We have our security group set up. We have our templates ready. It's time to build the deployment. In this particular presentation, I'm doing everything from scratch. I normally set these things up in advance and basically show you a presentation like this one. Voila, it's all there and everything's in place. This time I want to build this thing completely from scratch. So we've built all the little pieces. That's what we're shooting for. Let's start with a new deployment. I go to the deployment screen and I use the new button under deployments. This builds a new little paragraph or section in my management platform. Note that I still have my old deployments. I can have as many as I want. In this case, once again, I'll call this the example deployment. Okay. And give it a name. And any other words I want to put in here. Keep it short. It's going to be on the screen a lot. Important thing about this menu right here. Default availability zone. You pull it down and you go, well, it has EU, it has US. It makes all the sense in the world, except I want to have both. I want to have in this deployment the US and the EU. So what is this menu telling me? Well, if you leave it on US East 1A, what's going to happen is when we add arrays and extra servers, the default for this will be 1A. That doesn't mean I can't add new servers later. It's just that's the default availability zone. This is being done so you end up with your servers landing in the right place. If you aren't careful, all of them will just land in the same zone. This is important. You're charged between zones and even more between regions. So by having a default, you won't accidentally put servers in two different zones. And probably US East 1A for all time is probably the best default for you, unless the default for this particular deployment is all EU. Hit save, and that creates our new deployment. Now, all of our ingredients are set. We have all the pieces to put in this deployment all set up already in the right order. So we want to add the servers to this. I'm going to start by adding the EU server. When the menu pops up, these are the best practice RightScale templates. This is the best practice templates by Ed Goldberg. Notice there's not much to choose from because only the ones that are applicable to the EU are going to show up in this menu. So example EU, and we're going to give this a wonderful name, example EU server. Okay? We then have to select a key. Remember, we created keys just for this. So I'm going through a menu, and everything I'm expecting to be there is there because I knew in advance to set up all the things for this menu. So it's important to listen tight, otherwise you'll get to this menu and you'll go, oh no, I don't have a security zone. But we set up example EU for this particular server. So to review, I now have a server which is made from my material, my template, in the EU zone with the right nickname and the right security group. Now how about these elastic IPs? Elastic IPs, that's right, we set one up beforehand. Example EU is ready for us. Associate and launches a RightScale function. EC2 and all of the API permits you to associate an IP. RightScale permits you to automatically associate an IP at launch before the other scripts, which makes things a little less confusing. Some software really doesn't like the IP address to change during boot. So this is actually going to associate the IP before boot. So all of your software will see the new IP address while it's booting. When you click the Add button, it adds this server to the server deployment. Now we have a little container here. All the servers can talk to each other. Deployments are simply a little box to collect them all up in. And now we're going to add the other server. Oh, there's FlexiScale over there. Add EU server, add US server. Same thing over again. I'm going to go back to my private templates. I have a lot more of these.
Well,
Go to the US.
While you're at the US version, let me just answer a couple of questions that have come in. Someone asked about the CentOS and Ubuntu. So the way things work is, as you see, we use a base image in order to configure the servers. And this is something optional. So you can use any AMI that you have in the RightScale platform in order to get the monitoring and some of the other benefits to operate. You need to load some of our software, and we will be providing easy to install versions of that, or easier to install versions of that in a month time frame. But in general, we really recommend starting with a vanilla operating system as a server, and then install at boot time the software that you need to run on this. And this is what the RightScale platform and the server templates automate for you. And that provides maximum flexibility over time in order to configure your servers differently as everything evolves. When we provide our base machine images with a base operating system installed for CentOS and for Ubuntu. We just recently announced the Ubuntu ones are still in beta, but so far we've had good success with them. So really what we've done this from the very beginning of Amazon EC2, of building very clean machine images that have never booted, where we carefully control what's on the server on these images. We also provide the build script, so you can verify what you did and you can reproduce it if you want to make minor changes to it that is something that's you can do. Many users, even people that do not use RightScale, use our base images simply because they contain all of the little tricks and little details. There's several dozen little gotchas if you're just trying to build it from scratch yourself. It's entirely possible to do so, but just beware that there's a number of little details that you need to get right.
It's really nice to be able to start from a working example and make that little change that you need. Or in many cases with the RightScale templates, I remove features I don't need that are confusing me, but I started for something working. And that way, when I do my template and I add the scripts, I'll show you how to add a script here in a minute. They really work the first time, and you get things that really include all those little gotchas and best practice items that RightScale figured out after running thousands and thousands of servers. So without further ado, I'm going to start launching these servers. Now, just so you know, I could just click Start All Right here, and both servers would start automatically. But I'm going to do a little slower to show you exactly what's happening during this process. So I'm going to use this button over here, which launches the servers and allows me to confirm all the parameters. In this particular case, I've picked these templates because these templates contain all of the parameters, or inputs as we call them, used at launch, predefined in the template. So I didn't have to add any of these values, and none of these came up red when I launched the server. In a more complex example, we would actually change the names in some of these parameters, perhaps using a different application and loading a different code package, or changing the IP address or the DNS name on the external side. But for this case, I'm accepting all of the defaults. So here I've launched a server in the EU, and you'll see it'll show up in this area over here as a pending server here in a moment. What that means is I've made a request to AWS EC2, and EC2 has accepted that request. And the first thing we're doing is, as I said, associating an elastic IP at boot, so your software doesn't have to worry about the fact the IP address is changing at boot. Just to show you a little bit of both ways, I'm going to click Start All this time, and it'll start all the servers that aren't currently started. But a little less to do, because it just starts them. If there are no questions to be asked, they start up automatically. And this is the fundamental basis of our array grow and array shrink works later, is the ability to do what I call the one-click launch. No questions asked, everything's in the container, all the configuration management was thought through beforehand, all the application source code is there ready to go, either at S3 and SVN or attached to a template. And our servers are launching and ready to go. So while they're coming up, I wanted to demonstrate a little bit more about what you can do with these wonderful templates and how to add a script to them. So let's dive into one of these templates, and there's several ways to get there. Either we go here to Design Templates, and we can actually see the design of a template, or I can click on the template here. It gets me to the same place. The advantage here is it gets me directly to the template I want to manipulate. So I'm going to click on this one in preference to the accordion menu on the left, because I want to manipulate the example EU template. While those servers are booting, what I want to show you is the server is made up of layer upon layer of scripts that are running at boot time. Each one of these is a script that's layered on top of the AMI. They run in this order, distinctly in this order. Each one runs after the previous one if the previous one exit with a status of 0. Exit with completes correctly. If it doesn't complete correctly, we'll see stranded over here on this side, and we'll have to fix it. But I'm ready. If we have a problem, we'll work on it. So these are the scripts that are out there. So you can see right now there are no operational scripts on this particular server. What an operational script is a script that doesn't launch at boot. It launches on demand. We'll SSH into your server and run one little script for you, whatever you want it to be, on demand. So let's start by authoring a script and adding it to our two servers while they're booting. Note, I can do this while the servers are running, while they're booting, before they boot, anytime. I can author scripts and attach them to cloned private templates anytime I want. Obviously, you can't add them to RightScale templates because everybody else gets to see them. So let's go over here to my write scripts, go to my private write scripts, and create a brand new private write script from scratch. Okay, guys, you're going to get to watch me program live. And in this case, I want to be able to do an Apache restart, something that we have to do all the time. When we add new software, we have to restart the Apache server. Restart Apache. Okay? Do I need any packages? This line's important. At boot time, any packages we put here will be added to the yum configuration. That means there'll be added packages on the server. There are lots to use. I can show you later how to find the list of all available packages and how to properly type them. In this case, I don't really need any packages to be added. I'm just adding a restart script. This box, I get to write my code. So, bang, as they call it, shebang, /bin/bash. I'm writing the language bash, okay? And the command's very, very simple. On a CentOS machine, it's service httpd restart, okay? And I always add an exit 0 at the end, just in case I have an ill-behaved program that doesn't exit with a proper 0, but it does work correctly. So, you start with whatever language you like. That could be Ruby, it could be Perl, it could be Python or PHP. Service HTTP restart is the body of my program. It's a little program that runs. Exit 0 at the end, just to make sure I always exit with a clean exit of 0. I've added a comment and a name to this so I can find it later, and I hit save. A couple of really nice things happen. First of all, I get syntax highlighting. So when we see our code afterwards, you can see that the different lines are in different colors. If I had had quoted text, it'd be even more colorful. So now I have an Apache restart script I can add to any one of my servers. Information gives me sort of a top level on this, including which templates are using it. Attachments would be files that I attach, just like attaching something to an email. And these attached pieces of information end up in your S3 bucket. So they're actually loaded in your S3 bucket. And revisions is a revision control system that allows you to keep track of what you've done. So you can actually make commits, sort of like SVN, and keep track of different versions of your code. So now that I have my own private little template Apache restart, let's go back to my server templates, to my private server template, and add this wonderful new feature to new templates or even one I'm already running. Both would work. So the first thing we need to do is find my private templates, for example EU, and get back to where I was before. I'm now inside the template that's actually up here booting, and I'm looking at the scripts that are running right this minute. As a matter of fact, you might notice the names over here, DB MySQL Server, is actually what's going on right here. So it's actually walking through these scripts as you see them on the right side of the screen and on the left side of the screen. So I'm going to go to my private write scripts, and I'm going to add Apache restart. You might think, oh my God, that's miraculous. How did it remember which one I just did? Well, it takes the last one on the list, because that's obviously the next one you're going to want. I don't want to add this to the boot scripts. I want to add this to the operational scripts. You click Add, and that puts it in your template. So now I have a new operational script. So I have a little button now I can push that does an Apache restart on my server that I added to the template, customizing it for my purposes. Okay, so I've done this one. Let's go back and do the one for the US also. Remember, they're distinct, so I have to do it on both sides of the pond here.
Ed, we're running time here, so can we skip the US one?
Oh, okay, so let's go back to our management because I see that we've just gone operational. You're right, on both of our servers. Notice we now have our example deployment, and our example deployment is up and running on both sides of the pond. Very, very good. And our plots are starting to show. And if we click on monitoring, you can actually see we can monitor both of these brand new servers. I'll go back to the Servers tab, and we'll descend into the EU server. And in the example EU server, it's going to look a little different because I haven't layered my application here. I'm just using the example. This particular button inside the Info tab allows me to attach the external IP address, which is also a link to the website. So when it pops up, we can see a little demonstration. It has a database and the PHP info, enough for most programmers to continue forward. So without further ado, let's take a few questions about this brand new deployment example and how to deploy in multiple regions across the cloud.
Martin, do you want to take a couple of the questions?
Sure. Can you restate them for the people listening in? So let's go one at a time.
So one of them is about bandwidth between the US and EU if you're replicating the database or needing to move large amounts of data. What is really the picture on in terms of cost and in terms of performance for that?
Sure. So again, these are discrete sets of infrastructure. We currently don't have dedicated connectivity between our clusters of data centers. So we do have, we operate our own metro fiber rings to connect data centers within a cluster, but then we just connect the open internet for intra-cluster bandwidth. As such, in terms of performance, the answer to the question about what kind of performance you're going to see, well, it's basically the same answer you're going to get if you had, you're pushing a big chunk of data across the web and you've got tier 1 high capacity connectivity to the internet on both ends. In terms of cost, you pay standard bandwidth out costs from the origin cluster and then standard inbound data transfer costs to the inbound cluster.
Okay.
And the plot I'm showing right here is showing the bandwidth in and out of these clusters to the exact cost he's talking about. So this is actually a measure of the bits going in and out of those two different regions.
Another question is about sort of zone 1A. If one sets a default zone, is there any difference in the number of servers that are available in the different zones? Martin?
So actually, the answer is kind of yes and no. The reason we abstract away, we don't give you a named data center, we give you a zone, is that zone 1A may be different from customer to customer. And we did that to balance load across our infrastructure. So your zone, customer A's zone 1A is actually point at a different slice of our infrastructure than another customer's zone 1A.
Another question here is about attachments. So in the RightScale infrastructure, you can store attachments together with write scripts, and they get automatically downloaded to the instances. And currently, we store them in the US S3 bucket. So they get transferred across the regions at boot time. You can work around that by storing them explicitly and downloading them explicitly in the write script. That's something we're working on fixing and providing more flexibility there.
So there's going to be a bucket created for you automatically when you have a RightScale account. And it's important to understand, let's look at the S3 browser. Now this is the global S3, not the EU S3. You're going to see one extra bucket you didn't create, and the name is gloriously RightScale _ big long number, never interferes with anything else. And this is where all that goodness is going to be stored. So all of the attachments you make and little pieces of information RightScale needs to store in S3 are created in this automatic RightScale bucket. So don't be surprised when you see it, and don't delete it.
Another question is about APIs. You don't have to do everything through the GUI. You can also use an API. Most of the features, functions, and objects in RightScale are exported through an API so that you can integrate it into some other management console or automation that you may have to automatically add a server, launch a server, or do things of that sort. So that is also available. Did you have some more wrapping up here in terms of the demo? Something more to show, Ed?
Yeah, I thought it would be interesting to be really good about recycling and taking care of what we've done. It's nice to be able to deploy a demonstration like this and put it together really, really quickly. It's even nicer to be able to turn it off very, very fast. So here we have all these servers we've launched, and with a lot of the work I do, I can launch hundreds of servers at the same time. It's nice to be able to click on Stop Everything Unlocked, like I'm going to do right now, and terminate all the unlocked servers in a deployment. So what's nice about this system with Start All and Stop All Unlocked is I can build a whole deployment as long as there's not some order dependency to your application, and I can turn on and turn off. So now, as you see, I'm turning off those servers. So my little demonstration here of running 2 servers for about 10 minutes each cost me all of 20 cents. Back to you guys.
Good.
Great. So why don't we wrap up here? We're getting towards the top of the hour. With some parting comments, we'll turn it over to Torsten, and then, as usual, we'll keep the Q&A window open for a little bit longer, so our folks will stick around. If you do have any additional questions, go ahead and fire them away. Also, just wanted to point out, for those of you that are in the area, RightScale is going to have representatives at Cloud Camps Germany, Newcastle, and Scotland. So if you plan on being at any of those 3, please look for us or just shoot us an email, and we'll make sure that we connect. So I just want to thank Martin and Ed and, of course, Torsten for taking us through today. Hopefully you all were able to grasp some of the key benefits of managing multiple deployments across different regions. Key focus and highlights here is you have a single management platform that can access multiple different regions and resources. There are some key differences when you're looking at both the US and EU clouds, so RightScale has created tools and ways to make that very easy to take advantage of those. There are monitoring alerts and different functionality around auto-scaling. And then, of course, coming soon, as Torsten mentioned, there are 2 key things. One is a global server template infrastructure, so you won't have to do the 2-template structure you saw today, as well as an easy way to add the RightScale components, specifically monitoring and other intelligence to talk to our platform through images other than Right images on CentOS and Ubuntu. So with that, why don't we wrap up? Thanks, everyone, for joining. A couple parting comments here. As usual, if you'd like a copy of the slides or if you'd like a live demo of what you saw today, or just want to ask any other additional questions about deploying in the cloud, please feel free to contact us either by email or phone. RightScale does offer a free developer account that's loaded with functionality. You will need to use your own AWS credentials, but you can get that at rightscale.com/free trial. And all of these webinar live recordings, including all of past recordings, are available at rightscale.com/webinars. It'll be about 24 hours before we have this one up, so look for it sometime tomorrow. Thanks again for joining, and we'll leave the Q&A log open. If there are any additional questions, we'll be sticking around for another 10 or 15 minutes.
Please feel free to ask some more questions, and we will be answering them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue.